There, that'll do that. So I got the jamb temporarily fastened into this temporary wall. And that's so I can swing these doors real easy without anything interfering with the floor or the workbench in my shop or something. Because remember, the side lights swing in. I'm on the inside right now. So one of them swings off this jamb leg and the other swings off this jamb leg, whereas the door swings out. And now it's going to be real easy for me to check the fit on these. Now I've got this jamb set in here with just fasteners 1 and 2. 2 fasteners just at the top of the jamb. And if you've watched my other videos, you'll know this is the kind of 5 fastener system I use for setting prefits. I'm not going to put in fasteners 3 and 4 until I've swung the side lights and the door. And once I do swing those doors, I'll be able to adjust fastener 3 and 4 for cross leg and any twist in the doors and in the side lights. That way the doors will land flat against the jambs from the bottom of the doors to the top of the doors, the side lights and the door. So let's talk about handing for a second. The side lights are real simple because they're going to swing off the outside jambs. But the door could swing this way, right hand, or it could swing this way, left hand. Well, the little yoga studio that I'm going to be installing this on has a switch on the inside right over here. So I don't want to make this a left-hand door. It would be harder to get around the door to the switch. So I'm going to make this a right-hand door that swings out in this direction. And the reason it's right-hand is because my butt's in the butts in the hinges, and the door swings to the right. So that's the system I use, and that's the way I'm going to mortise these jambs for hinges, and that's the next step. I'm going to use a Templaco plastic laminate kind of template here, and this is the kind of template I use for any door that I'm installing in a new jamb. If I'm putting a new door in a new jamb, this is the least expensive kind of template you can use for the job. And all you have to do is take the template and position it inside the jamb carefully. Now, if you look closely, there's a little button right on the top of the template. And that's going to prevent me from sliding the template all the way up against the head jamb. And the same on this side. I can flip the template around because it's symmetrical in either direction. And there's a button on this side too. Right here, there's a little plastic button. And that stops the template from hitting the top of the jamb by a strong 1/16, not quite an 1/8. For some of you, that button's not going to be quite thick enough because some of you are going to want to have a slightly larger head gap. This is a pretty narrow, skinny head gap to work with, so keep that in mind. If the button for you isn't thick enough, remove it. Replace it with a screw with a good size head on it, and that'll give you a better head gap. Because when I position the template in the jamb and I mortise for my hinges, that head gap is going to give me clearance between the top of the door and the head jamb, as long as when I position the template on my door and my side lights, I flush up this edge, not the button, but this edge. And that's how I end up with a good, consistent head gap across all the side lights and the doors. So let's go ahead and mortise for these right now. And we'll slip this template in here, slide it up, give it a couple of taps, just to secure it against the jamb. And I'm ready to run my router. The template has 2 stops on the back of it, and they're adjustable. So you want to make sure that they're adjusted so that you're mortising symmetrically the same back set from the face of the jamb and from the face of the door. There's a stop here at the top of the jamb, and there's another stop at the bottom of the jamb. These stops rest against the outside edge of the jamb and the outside edge of the door, and that ensures that when you swing the door, it'll end up flush to the jamb, from the top of the jamb to the bottom of the jamb. Now that all of the hinges are mortised in the jambs, I can take this template off and mortise the hinges and the doors and bevel them too. Now before I can mortise for any of the hinges on the side lights of the doors, I like to put a piece of tape or an X or something at the very top and on the side of the door or side light that the hinge projects out of. So the hinge will be projecting out this edge and the side light will be swinging this way. And by having that tape there, I'll never confuse where the top of the door is. I like to prep the hinge style on all of my doors first. It's a system I learned from Alan Royal Schaefer, and no matter what you do when you're hanging doors, you need to have simple systems to protect you from making silly mistakes. And that's one of the things I do. I always hinge the hinge style first, and then I roll the door over, and I do the strike style and bore for the lock. That prevents me from hinging the wrong side of the door. And the other thing that prevents me from making mistakes like that is this blue tape or the green tape or the little X you put on the top of the door. That tape always has to point towards you. That means the hinge barrels, when you mortise for the hinges, always point toward your belly. And the door bench then acts as the door stop. It stops the door or the side light from tipping over while you're planing it, but it also, metaphorically, it acts as the door stop in the jamb. So you always know this is the stop side of the door. This is the hinge barrel side of the door. Your bevels on your doors always point down into your bench. It's just simple rules like that that protect you from making some really silly mistakes. To make sure that I'm cutting exactly a 2-degree bevel, I use this little angle block. It's got a 2-degree bevel cut on it, and when I set it against the sole of the plane, I can adjust the fence, and that way I'm certain I'm cutting exactly the right bevel. If you bevel the hinge style, when the door is closed and inside the jamb, the hinge leaves are separated just a little bit. If it's an old jamb and it's got some paint buildup on it or something, if your door is beveled on the hinge style, it's going to more than likely not end up being jam bound against that old paint. And number two, if your hinge is open a little bit when the door is closed, it gives you a little bit of extra room to bend the hinges later to adjust the fit of the door. We'll probably be demonstrating that once we get all of these doors and side lights swung. After I plane the hinge style, I always run my sander over it, take out any marks that might be left by my planer, and make sure it's glass smooth. And now I'm ready to mortise for the hinges. I'm going to take my template, set it on the hinge style, and in this case, look for the blue or the green tape or the X, and make sure that your template is flush with that edge of the top of the door. And now I can mortise for those hinges. I'm using a Vicks bit, a little spring-loaded, self-centering drill bit, so that I can drill pilot holes for each one of these hinge screws, and that way the screws won't pull the hinge in closer to the edge of the door or push the hinge out of the mortise. And now, I'll roll the side light over so I can plane the lock style, always keeping the tape and the hinge barrels now pointing toward my belly, away from my bench. For these little narrow side lights, to set the angle of the bevel, I just set the angle of my fence at 6 degrees. after I smooth that off with the belt sander, I like to take a little sanding block and just ease that edge over a little bit. So when I move the door, it won't ding that edge, that sharp edge. And also, sometimes that edge is so sharp, especially like on a fur door or something, it'll cut you or leave a really bad splinter. Now, I'm ready to swing this thing. I put a block of wood on the floor just to elevate the door a little bit. And I'll swing that leaf back toward the jamb. With the door inside the jamb at the bottom, I can tip it up and look, the hinge will drop right into the hinge mortise, and I can put a screw right through that top hole. There. It's still not quite in the mortise at the bottom here, but I'm going to lift the door up in just a minute and it'll drop right in. But first, I want to put a screw in each one of these lower hinges too. So I'll put my foot on the bottom of the door and take the weight off it. And notice how it's lower than the hinge mortise there. So I'm just going to put this screw in until it's snug, not too tight. I'll put one screw through the bottom hinge too, just to hold it still, not too tight. Now if I lift that door up, that hinge will drop right into its mortise. And I can put another screw in right at the bottom. And now I can put the rest of the screws in too. And now let's see how that door swings. Ooh, clears just right. Nice. One more side light and then the door. Now this one is the left-hand side light. So the tape is up here. Here's the top of the door. So for left-hand doors, the top of the door is always at the top of my box. And for right-hand doors, the top of the door is always at the bottom of my bench. So you can see this is a pretty simple system. If you're using a bench, it really helps you avoid making some really stupid mistakes. And again, I set it inside the sill a little bit, inside the opening. So when I tip it up, it lines up. And sometimes it's too high. And if it is, just give it a little nudge out from the jamb and it'll line up perfectly with that top screw hole in the hinge. And then it's pretty easy to start a screw up there. Same game as I did with the other side light. Put my foot against the bottom, pick the door up, hold it with the toe of my foot, and drive a screw in. Not too snug, because I want to be able to pick that up in a second, because almost every time the doors settle down on those first screws. There we go. Get all set up here. and then take the weight off of it. Boom. The hinge drops right inside that mortise every single time. I'll take some more weight off of that door as I put these others in, just to make sure those hinges drop into that mortise. Nice. More. Now let's see how that one fits. Ooh, pretty slick. Matching reveals all the way around. And all that's left is to swing this right-handed door. I switched my plane back to that standard 2-degree bevel because I'm going to bevel the hinge side and the strike side on this door with just that 2-degree bevel. This ain't one of those 12-inch side lights that needs that really steep bevel. And now I'm going to set my template on here. That pin's a little stuck there. I'll set my template on here. And what have I got, a right-hand door or a left-hand door? Does the template go up here, flush to this end of the door, or does it go flush to this end of the door? Well, first, look for the tape. So obviously that's the top of the door, so I want to be flush here. And also, there's a right-hand door. So for a right-hand door, the top of the door is always at this end of the bench. This is really simple stuff once you get it down. So I'm just going to set my template on here, get it flush, and then drive in one of these pins. And down here too. These doors are pretty heavy, so when you pick them up, I always pick up half the weight of the door at a time. So I slid it off the rung on my bench. I'll pick up the top end of it, roll it up, and now I'll pick up the whole weight of the door comfortably, bring it down to the bottom of my bench, roll it down. There's a thermopane door, dual pane. Probably weighs about 150 pounds. Something like that, about as much as I do. I'm 70 years old. And if I move those doors properly like that, I could keep doing this for a while longer. Right. We got a bore for the lock set. And where's that going to go? 36 inches off the floor, approximately, 34 to 36. Do I measure from here? Wait, where's the bottom of the door? Where's the top of the door? Oh, there's my tape down here. So this is the top of the door. So I don't even have to look at how big the rails are. I can measure from the bottom of the door up, 36 inches. And if I were putting a deadbolt in, I could put that at 40 or 42. And give myself a nice line across there so I can see it clearly. With my boring jig, I just have to take the spade bit, line it up with that pencil line, stand it up, and then tighten it up. Now, sometimes you have to adjust this bolt right here just to make sure the door is parallel, a little bit more tension there, from the bottom of the clamp, the bottom of the jig, all the way to the top of the door, and parallel across the back too. So I can tighten up that wing nut really snug so this thing is gripped on there so it won't slide around and won't mar the door. I always like to drill the face bore first and then pull the face bore bit out before I drill the edge bore. Now, I learned this the hard way. If you drill the edge bore first, it's hard to pull the bit out, and it'll end up dropping down just as you get inside the door with your face bore bit. And the face bore bit has carbide teeth on it, and when those carbide teeth hit the edge bore bit, it just rips them to pieces. So always drill your face bore first. Oh, this is a Plastpro door. It's got a continuous lock style in here that's made out of an LVL. It's solid, and it's not going to warp or twist or check or crack or anything, but it's a little hard to drill through. Another good reason to have a carbide face bore bit. I've got a second router set up just for doing the latch prep mortise. Because that's set at a totally different depth. And now I'm set for the lock, the latch. The hinges are on, and I can swing this one too. Once again, I set it on the sill, inside the opening. And then, make sure all the hinge leaves are closed. Sometimes it's hard to swing them back if they're open all the way. And then tip this up and see how high it goes. That's too high. So I'll give it a little tap, and that's just about right. So I'll get myself all set now. Screw gun with a screw all set to go. That's one. Now this door is definitely going to drop as I put these screws in. No question about it. There's the weight off of it. It's going to swing open a little bit. You'd be amazed at how big a door and how heavy a door you can get on the hinges. Get the hinges on the jamb with just a couple screws. Great. Now we'll use that same technique again of lifting that door up so the hinges drop right into the mortise. Almost there. This might be a little too snug. There we go. Nice. Yep. And then the bottom. All right. I've got two more screws to put in at the top here. And then we can see how this door fits. Moment of truth. Ooh, kind of nice. And a really neat story too. I mean, this is just perfect for the lesson I want to show you about how you can adjust a door to fit when you have back-to-back mold. Oh, maybe you should come around here and take a look at this. Okay, you're in here now. Let's check this out. I don't need this screw gun anymore. Look at the head gap. Look how it grows across the door until it's really big here. I can get my finger in. And the strike gaps gets really small up at the top of the door. And down here at the bottom of the door, the strike gap is way too big. And there's more. Check out the gap above the top hinge here. It's way too fat, way too big. And down here at the bottom of the door is almost touching the jamb. Well, what's going on here? I mean, the side lights fit perfectly, right? The jamb's perfectly plumb. The door is perfectly square. What's the deal? Well, it's all about the hinges, not the door, not the jamb. And normally, if we're setting a single door, or even a pair of doors without side lights, we could put in fasteners 5 and 6 pretty soon here. Not just yet, but pretty soon. And that would pull this top hinge back and take the weight of the door off of it. Remember, the top hinge here is under tension. The door is pulling down on it. The weight of the door is pulling down on that hinge. The bottom hinge, exactly the opposite. It's under compression. The weight of the door is pressing against that hinge. So that's why the sagging of the door creates this big head gap, this tight strike gap. The compression on that hinge creates this big gap on the bottom of the door at the strike jamb, and it also creates this tight gap down here. How do we fix that on a jamb with a back-to-back maul where we can't tighten up the screws, especially when the back-to-back maul has active side lights swinging up against it? I mean, there's nothing holding this maul. It can move a little bit even. It's flexing just a hair. How do we fix that? There's only one way to do it, and that's to adjust the hinges. We can bend the hinges, or we can mortise them in deeper, or we can pad them out with little shims. That's one of the reasons I've always saved all these hotel card keys. They're perfect for shimming out hinges. But in this case, the hinges they're not like bright brass or ball bearing or something really high end. They're just regular residential hinges. So I'm going to adjust all of them with my crescent wrench and my nail set. I'll start with the bottom hinge. I'm going to spread the leaves of the hinge apart a little bit and move the door away from the jamb while I do that. So I'm going to take my nail set and push it in real hard against the barrel of that hinge and close the door on it. And that will spread the hinge. And I'll do it evenly up and down the hinge gently so I don't rip the screws out of the jamb or the back of the door. And next, I'll squeeze the top hinge. I'll do that with my crescent wrench. So this is the spread, and the top hinge will get the squeeze. I'll start by driving the pin up. So it's only engaging the top 2 knuckles. I don't want it engaging the rest of the hinge. I'll put my crescent wrench on the leaf that's attached to the door. Now remember here, I want to move the door that way. I don't want to move the hinge on the jamb. So to move the door that way, I have to take the leaf that's attached to the door and move it toward me. It's the opposite of what you might think. And I'm going to move it a bunch. When I drive this pin back in and it collects this bottom knuckle too, look, it's going to pull that door right back toward the hinge gap. Maybe that's a little too much. It's almost touching the jamb. I might have to spread this hinge just a little bit. There, right there. I just spread that top hinge a little bit. And now I've got decent hinge gap between the door and the jamb above the top hinge. And I've got pretty good head gap and a nice strike gap, but I'm ahead of myself. I spent a little time here adjusting this door to fit in the jamb by bending and tweaking the hinges, but really what I need to do is install fastener 3 and 4. This is a really important part of installing doors. Fasteners 1 and 2 can go in right away, but fasteners 3 and 4 can't go in until you check for cross-leg. And if you install any other fasteners through that jamb, through any of the jamb legs before you do 3 and 4, you can't adjust for cross-leg. Let me show you what I mean. Check this out. I haven't put the Q-line or the kerf-in weather stripping into the jamb yet, so you'll be able to see this more easily. When the door touches the jamb at the bottom, it's not touching the jamb at the top, so it'll never engage the weather stripping properly. I can get my finger in here at the top. What's with that? Well, this is why you have to put in fasteners 3 and 4 before you put any other fasteners in that jamb. I've just proven this to you. It's black and white. I get this question so often from people that are having problems with their doors and the door's not engaging the weather stripping properly, or the door's not sitting flat against the stop properly. And I see all kinds of instructions from door manufacturers that tell you should put a level on the wall everywhere and make sure everything's plumb. Plumb has nothing to do with this. We're talking about cross leg. That's when the bottom legs on the wall, the studs on the wall at the very bottom of the floor, aren't in plane with the head. The head's always in plane because it has a continuous header. But the bottom can get out of plane, and if it does, and your jambs follow those trimmers or those jack studs, then your door more than likely won't sit flat against the stop. And also, doors aren't perfectly flat, man. If you think that, get over it. Doors are made by men. They're not made by some supreme being. In fact, a 6/8 door is only guaranteed to be flat within 1/4 of an inch. And if a door's out 1/4 of an inch, it's within warranty and it will not engage the weather stripping. So I don't understand why door manufacturers keep supplying instructions where they tell you to put screws through the hinges right away before you adjust for cross leg. That's ridiculous. You have to put in fasteners 3 and 4 before you put any more fasteners through the hinges or any jambs. So all I have to do here, since I have no other fasteners in this jamb, I don't even have fasteners 3 and 4 in yet, is take the bottom of this jamb and kick it that way. This is just a graphic example of what I'm talking about. And now the door is coming up flat against that stop perfectly. Now, if that doesn't convince you to never put fasteners through the hinges or the jambs until you put in fasteners 3 and 4, until you've corrected for cross leg, I don't know what else will. Fastener 3 and 4 go in the very bottom of the jamb. And when you tighten those screws down, make sure you've got some shims right behind them or you might tweak that jamb right there. You're probably starting to get the point. I don't know how many times I've heard carpenters complain about door companies sending out pre-hungs that are improperly built, or carpenters complaining about doors that are warped or twisted or something. As I've just demonstrated, it's the installation, man. A good installer, a competent carpenter, can handle just about anything and still get a door to work and look right, even if the door is out of square. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, let's go back to what this door looked like before I started adjusting and bending hinges. It had a big head gap, just like this. Now, yeah, sometimes that could be because the door is out of square, but more than likely it's not. More than likely it's the installer's fault. The problem can be easily caused by a sill that's out of level, that isn't perfectly level and perfectly straight. Or it could be a floor that's out of level and not perfectly straight. Well, let's say there's a belly right in this area, a little dip in the floor, or a dip in that oak sill I made. That's exactly the result that'll happen. Exactly. And the solution is super simple. Go ahead and install fasteners 1, 2, 3, and 4, and before doing anything else, adjust the sill or the floor so you don't have a big head gap above the door at the strike jamb. All you have to do is shim the sill or the hinge jamb right there. I can take a pry bar, drive it in underneath the sill, lift up the sill, and put a shim in there. But before I do, let me show you what's happening here at the head of the door. Now, this is just another graphic demonstration. I'm going to go too far with this so you can really see what I'm talking about. With my foot on the pry bar and fasteners 3 and 4 are already installed, I'm going to step on that pry bar and lift this jamb up in the air and I can lift it high enough so that the door actually starts to rub on the head jamb. So obviously this is a real easy problem to solve. All I have to do is replace that pry bar with a shim, and with fasteners 3 and 4 installed and 1 shim, I can make this head gap just about anything I want. So why didn't I demonstrate this technique before instead of showing people how to bend all these hinges? Well, for a simple reason. If you install your jambs so that they're perfectly level and level on the floor and perfectly straight if you've got a sill, perfectly straight on the floor, you're not going to have these kind of problems. Even if the door's out of square a little, you can pull that out by adjusting the hinges. And besides, more than likely, you may have to adjust the hinges anyway, because that technique of putting a shim underneath the sill isn't going to solve any kind of hinge gap discrepancy. That you're going to only be able to solve by adjusting the hinges. So that's why I showed you how to adjust the hinges first. And I showed you this technique mostly because I've heard for so many guys that are complaining about doors that are out of square. And that is that. Now that we've got fasteners 3 and 4 in, we can put fasteners 5 and 6 in if we're doing a regular pair, or fastener 5 if it's just a signal. In this case, putting long screws through the hinges isn't going to do any good at all, because you got a back-to-back mull here and it's not going to pull the hinge or secure the jamb or the hinge any better than what we've done already. Once all the primary fasteners are installed, then you can shim the whole jamb and put fasteners everywhere you want, especially near the lock style where the lock is, so that you can secure that real well and check your gaps all the way around as you're shimming. But I'm not going to get into that right now. That's the easy part. I want to talk about the weather stripping now. It's exciting too. I'm going to put these U-shaped 1 3/4 door shoes that have a little drip on them on every one of these doors. The side lights, obviously, the drip's going to point outside, and the door, the drip's going to point outside. So fitting these is a little different, but the cool thing is, and this might excite you too, I don't know, but I'm going to be able to get 2 door shoes out of this 36-inch shoe, one for this 12-inch side light and one for this 12-inch side light. Wow, woohoo! Installing the door shoe on this swing-out door is pretty easy. All I got to do is take my scribes, spread them to a 1/2 inch, because that's about how thick that rubber is on the bottom of the shoe. Pull the door closed, and remember, I'm at the high side of the threshold. That sill slopes out, so all I have to do is scribe this door and then cut it at that line, and the door shoe will engage the threshold just as the door swings closed. I don't have to notch the threshold, this door shoe. I don't have to do anything special because it's a swing out door. But the side lights are another story. It's really the drip edge on this door shoe that causes a little bit of a wrinkle. Like I said, on this swing out door, all I got to do is cut the door off, cut the door shoe square at both ends and slip it up underneath the door. That's it, nothing interferes. But on these side lights, the drip edge goes on this side, the outside always, so I'm going to have to notch that drip edge so that it clears the jamb on both sides. So this is kind of like a 2-step process. First, I scribe the door that 1/2 inch, and cut it off so the door shoe will fit between the sill and the bottom of the door. And then I have to cut that door shoe and bring it over, slip it onto the door, and mark it at these 2 lines. Mark the drip edge itself, just the edge, and notch just the drip edge, so that when the side light closes, the drip edge clears the face of the jamb on both sides. I'll show you what I mean when I make that notch. Now that is a nice, tight, waterproof seal. So I take the full-length door shoe and I slip it onto the side light and I flush it up with the back of the side light. And then I take a nice sharp pencil and I make a line across the bevel. That's where I'm going to cut it off. Then I mark for each one of the notches. And they're right here, where I'm going to have to notch this edge of the drip edge off. And there's a very nice sealing door shoe on the side light with the drip edge just clearing the jamb. And that means all I've got left to do here is fit the casement latches onto the side lights, put the lock on the door so I can mortise for the strike on the jamb, and then I can take the whole thing completely apart so I can pre-finish all the jambs and the doors and the side lights and then pack it all up into my Jeep, because there's no way in the world I'm going to be able to carry this jamb assembled in my Jeep to the job site.